You mistake power for a crowded room, for smiling faces, eager nods, and the chorus of applause. You chase the illusion of connection, believing influence is a shield. But tell me, why the sting of their departure? Why the hollow ache when the very hands that once held you aloft now grasp for your throne? The higher you climb, the thinner the air, and the clearer the view. Power does not cultivate loyalty. It reveals its breaking point. And those breaks come fast, sharp, and from those who stood closest. The Stoics taught us, the nearer a man comes to a calm mind, the closer he is to strength. Not applause, not validation. Strength. True strength is forged in silence, not on a stage. It listens more than it speaks. It seeks solitude not from weakness, but from necessity. If you desire power, you must first learn to stand alone. Strip away the noise, the comfort, the crowd. Then ask yourself, without the chorus, without the company, who are you? If the silence of that question unnerves you, good. That is where the path begins. At first, progress feels like a shared journey. Your first steps are met with cheers. Everyone loves a beginning, a climb that does not yet threaten their own position. But as you ascend, a silence begins to gather. Not because you have grown cruel, but because you have grown selective. You choose which voices to heed, which hands to trust. And quietly, the crowd thins to a circle, the circle to a line, until all that remains is your own shadow, cast long behind you. The truth is, power was never a collective endeavor. It is measured not by the people you gather, but by those you find the courage to walk away from. Those who once championed you may feel betrayed, not because you wronged them, but because you evolved without their consent. In their eyes, your growth is an act of disloyalty. In truth, it is the only way it happens. Power demands boundaries, built not in a day, but brick by brick, thought by thought. And here is the uncomfortable truth. The ones who protest your distance the loudest are often those who benefited most from your lack of it. They were not drawn to your discipline or your vision. They were drawn to the warmth of your fire. And when you stopped burning for their comfort, they felt the cold and walked away. You did not lose them. You filtered them. Your journey, by its nature, began to do what all true transformations must. It shed what no longer belonged. This is not rejection, it is refinement. Do not try to explain it. To do so is to shrink yourself to soothe another's discomfort with your evolution. The moment you do, you abandon the path. As the circle tightens, your vision sharpens. You stop seeking advice from every direction and begin to trust your own compass. The noise of other opinions becomes static, not threatening, just irrelevant. You learn that people will misunderstand this. They will call it selfish, cold, detached. Let them, because the ones who matter understand that boundaries are not walls. They are filters designed to keep your mission focused and your mind clear. The ones who don't understand were never with you to begin with. They were just nearby. We are taught that connection is born of vulnerability, that to be accepted we must lay ourselves bare. But step into the arena of influence, and the rules change. You learn that every shared weakness can be forged into a weapon. Every confessed doubt becomes another's leverage. What once made you relatable now leaves you exposed. To be seen is no longer to be safe, it is to be a target. This does not mean you cease to feel, it means you cease to display. In the unforgiving light of power, your emotions are not mere expressions, they are signals. And the wrong signal is an invitation to a challenge. So you learn detachment, not from pride, but from necessity. You carry burdens no one else can comprehend. Your silence becomes your shield. Explanations become liabilities. True power thrives not on emotional transparency, but on controlled expression. For unmastered emotion is a storm, all noise and chaos. It does not lead, it only confuses, and confusion is the first crack in any foundation. This is the fortress of the mind, not stone walls, but a quiet, intentional boundary. It doesn't shut the world out, it filters it. It exists to keep you whole in a world that would pull you apart. You stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding. You stop defending your peace from those who thrive on your turmoil. Your stability may make others uncomfortable. Let it. Their discomfort reveals who was truly invested in your confusion. Real power lives in the person who can sit with their decisions and not flinch, who can lose approval and not panic, who can walk away from praise and not look back. They are not loud. They are not performing. They are simply doing the work, quietly, consistently, unbothered. You come to understand that the climb was never about being seen. It was about seeing clearly. And the higher you go, the less you need, the less you say. You realize that ultimate power is not influence over others. It is not needing that influence at all. It is being at peace with being misunderstood, misread, alone, not as a punishment, but as a sanctuary. In that quiet alignment, everything unnecessary falls away. The drama, the distractions, the performative support. You trade noise for peace, attention for clarity. And you stop missing the crowd because you see solitude not as something to escape, but as the very space where you become unshakable. To stand like a mountain, unshaken by the storm, is not to be unfeeling. It is to know that your emotions are not the ones in command. It means you have built a foundation beneath the surface, a bedrock so steady that no rumor, no betrayal, no fleeting praise can ever touch it. From this inner stillness, you navigate the world. Conflict is no longer chaos. It is merely information. Criticism loses its sting, becoming either insight or noise, and you learn to discern the difference. Praise does not intoxicate. It simply passes through. And betrayal. Betrayal no longer shatters you, for you no longer rely on others to hold you together. This is what makes you untouchable. Not because nothing happens to you, but because nothing outside of you decides who you are. But do not mistake this for isolation. This strength does not repel connection. It invites it, but only the kind that honors your boundaries. It allows for love, but never at the cost of self-abandonment. It opens the door, but does not remove the threshold. People may walk with you, but never through you. Those who understand this will stay. The rest will depart, and you will learn not to chase them. For peace is not found in the presence of others, but in the absence of noise. And noise takes many forms. Gossip, doubt, the pressure to perform, to explain, to shrink. This is why such a mindset matters. It does not just protect your peace, it preserves your purpose. And purpose, without boundaries, dissolves into mere performance. You forget why you began. You start making decisions from fear, from fatigue, from the need to prove something. That is what happens when the fortress is weak. You become reactive, but when the walls are strong, you become strategic, intentional, rooted. As Epictetus said, "No person is free who is not master of themselves." That mastery begins within the mind, in the discipline to hold your ground when the world pushes, in the wisdom to say no, not with anger but with certainty, in the courage to walk away from anything that tempts you to betray your own integrity. That is the essence of the fortress. It doesn't control others. It controls your response to them. And in that control, there is freedom. A mind like this needs no applause. It seeks no reassurance. It does not even require understanding. It needs only to be aligned with truth, with purpose, with something deeper than the fleeting moment. Once you build that alignment, you begin to see things for what they are, not what you hoped they would be. That clarity may cost you relationships, opportunities, or comfort, but it will grant you something far more valuable: consistency, direction, and inner power. As this power grows, you begin to move differently through the world. Not faster, not louder, just with more precision. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself. You choose where your energy goes. You become less accessible to drama and more available to purpose. You let go of the need to be liked and embrace the freedom to be real. With every boundary held, your mind becomes quieter, your heart lighter, your path clearer. This is the fortress. It is not a wall to keep the world out, but a foundation to keep your strength in. It does not make you hard. It makes you whole. It does not make you distant. It makes you discerning. And when the storms arrive, as they always will, you do not fall apart. You do not break. You remain still, clear, untouched. Not because nothing tried to shake you, but because you finally built something that nothing could move. Betrayal never begins with a knife. It begins with trust. It starts in the comfort of soft moments, when your guard is down and you believe, just for a second, that someone truly sees you and would never cause you harm. That illusion is the true danger. For betrayal does not come from strangers. It does not shout from a distance. It whispers from the seat beside you, from the friend you once called family, from the one who knew the way into your heart. Not by force, but by invitation. After you have been betrayed, not once, but several times, you begin to realize a truth that cuts deeper than any single act. Betrayal is a pattern, not a surprise. It is not always born of malice. Sometimes its roots are in weakness, in jealousy, in quiet desperation. But the outcome is always the same. You are left holding the broken pieces of what you thought was solid. The instinct is to ask, why? To replay every conversation, to blame yourself for not seeing what was coming. But the truth is, the clues were always there, subtle, overlooked, dismissed in the name of trust. That is how betrayal works. It hides behind familiarity. It blends with loyalty, until the moment it doesn't. You learn, quickly, that closeness is not the same as alignment. Just because someone walks with you does not mean they walk for you. Some walk beside you because they believe in your destination. Others walk beside you only to see how far they can follow before they push you from the path and attempt to take your place. The pain comes not just from the loss, but from the clarity it forces upon you. You see the small ways you ignored your instincts, the moments you brushed off their envy, the times you thought, they would never do that to me, only to discover they already had. Here is where most go wrong. They become cynical. They shut everyone out. They allow betrayal to harden them into suspicion. But the wiser path is not isolation. It is discernment. It is learning to observe without always reacting, to listen between the lines, to trust not blindly, but with awareness. You do not need to expect betrayal from everyone. You just need to stop being surprised when it comes from someone you once let close. The Stoics never urged us to expect perfection, only to expect human nature. And human nature, left unchecked, will often serve itself first. As Seneca said, "The man who has anticipated the coming of troubles takes away their power when they arrive." This is what awareness gives you. Not bitterness, but strength. Not fear, but foresight. You stop handing out the keys to your heart just because someone smiles. You stop sharing your deepest plans with those who have not proven they can hold your silence with respect. You stop offering loyalty in advance and start letting time reveal who is truly for you. You will start to notice that betrayal has a rhythm. It follows a predictable sequence: intimacy, followed by comfort, then subtle shifts, and finally, the break. If you pay attention, you will see the signs before the fracture occurs. A certain look when you succeed, a subtle distance when you need support, a change in language from we to me. This is not paranoia, it is pattern recognition. But what makes betrayal so destructive is what it does to your belief in connection. It makes you question the good ones. It makes you hold back from people who have done nothing wrong. That is why the fortress of the mind matters. The filters you build are not cold, they are necessary. Not because everyone is out to get you, but because not everyone is meant to go where you are going. And some people, even those you love, will try to sabotage you just to keep you close, because your growth makes their stagnation unbearable. There is a quiet violence in betrayal that is born not of anger, but of comfort. The one who betrays you rarely does so with malice in their eyes. They do it with the belief that you will recover, that you will understand, that they had no other choice. They justify their actions, reframing the story in their favor. And that is what stings the most: the absolute absence of accountability. The betrayal is compounded by their belief that they, somehow, are the victim. But you do not have to carry that weight. You do not have to seek justice from the one who fractured your trust. You simply have to decide that this chapter ends here. No more energy, no more access, no more wondering. As Carl Jung observed, shame is a soul-eating emotion. Betrayal often leaves shame in its wake, not just for what they did, but for what you did not see. You feel foolish, exposed. But shame is only powerful when it goes unexamined. The moment you step back and see betrayal for what it is, not a reflection of your weakness, but a lesson in clarity, you begin to reclaim your strength. You do not become harder. You become wiser, sharper, more attuned to the silent language people speak when they think no one is watching. And eventually you become grateful. Not for the pain, but for the precision it gave you, for the way it taught you to protect your peace without apology, for how it carved a clear line between those who claim loyalty and those who demonstrate it. You will see that every betrayal was a kind of brutal grace, stripping away illusions and giving you the chance to rebuild, not with bitterness, but with discernment. And that discernment becomes your shield. You stop explaining your choices. You stop oversharing your dreams. You let people earn the right to stand beside you, not through words, but through consistency, through how they act when you are of no use to them. That is how you know. So you become intentional. You keep your circle small, not out of fear, but because you have seen what happens when it is too wide. You speak less, not because you lack trust, but because you have learned the value of holding some truths for yourself. You let betrayal refine you into someone who walks with quiet strength, who loves with boundaries, and who never forgets that the people closest to you will always carry the greatest power to hurt you, which is why your greatest power must be knowing exactly who is worth the risk. When you are young, trust feels simple. You give it without hesitation, assuming that if your intentions are good, theirs must be as well. For a time, that innocence feels like strength. But safety built on assumption is fragile. Eventually, life teaches you that trust is not a gift to be given freely. It is a currency, one of the rarest, and every time it is spent in the wrong place, it costs you more than you ever imagined. This is the lesson most learn too late, that trust, once given freely, becomes a calculated risk. The higher you climb, emotionally, professionally, spiritually, the greater that risk becomes. Your vulnerabilities, once harmless, can become weapons in the hands of others. This does not mean you stop trusting. It means you begin to choose with intention, not with fear, but with awareness. You come to understand that trust is owed to no one. It is earned, slowly, consistently, and through action over time. There is a kind of grief in this realization. It is the letting go of the idea that you can be fully seen by every person who claims to care. It is accepting that proximity does not equal loyalty. That truth stings at first, but it also sharpens you. You stop mistaking charisma for character. You stop equating a shared history with a shared intention. And, most importantly, you stop confusing kindness with alignment. To be powerful is to be deliberate. You understand that trust isn't about what someone says. It's about what they do when it's inconvenient, when no one is watching, when they have nothing to gain. That is the test most people fail. This is why the wise grow quieter, why they share less and move in silence. It is not because they have lost faith in people, but because they have found peace in selectivity. They have learned that some desire your trust not to honor it, but merely to access you. Aristotle told us that we are what we repeatedly do. In the realm of trust, this means you pay attention not to grand gestures, but to quiet patterns. Trust becomes less about the stories people tell and more about the patterns they reveal. This shift makes your relationships not colder, but clearer. You no longer need to be understood by everyone. You begin to hold your inner world with reverence, knowing that the more sacred something is, the fewer hands it belongs in. There is a strength that comes from keeping certain things for yourself, not out of secrecy, but out of self-respect. The powerful do not hide, they refine. They withhold not from fear, but from discipline. But this does not make you cynical. It makes you calibrated. You still love, but you love wisely. You still connect, but with boundaries. And you still open your heart, but only to those who have proven they know how to hold what you give them. Even then you watch, not with suspicion, but with awareness. As Carl Jung believed, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But transformation requires integrity. Most people are not ready for this responsibility. And once you see that, you stop expecting it from them. In that release, you reclaim your power. Slowly, you begin to seal the doors where you have overexplained or overexposed yourself, not with anger, but with grace. You are not punishing anyone. You are protecting what matters. And the more selective you become, the more honest your life becomes. The relationships that remain are stronger, the conversations deeper, the silence richer. You have learned to trust yourself first, and that is the trust that matters most. The world does not need more open books. It needs more wise authors, people who know which pages to share and which to keep for themselves. People who understand that trust is not a transaction, it is a bond. And bonds, when formed without care, become chains. But when formed with intention, they become anchors. Trust is always a risk. But now, it is a risk you measure, a gift you protect, a language you speak with precision. And in that precision, you find a peace the reckless never will. Clarity is not something you stumble upon. It is something you create space for. And, more often than not, that space is created by distance. Not the cold distance of emotional detachment, but the clarifying distance of a painter stepping back to see the entire canvas. You cannot understand a situation while you are still wrapped in its emotions. You cannot make sharp decisions when your vision is fogged by closeness, by comfort, or by urgency. This is why those who lead, think, and live well are often misunderstood as distant. But their distance is not rejection, it is reflection. There is a quiet power in learning to step back, to not lunge at every emotion, to not react to every shift in another's tone or behavior. When you are too close to everything, you become reactive. You see threats where there are none. You project fears instead of identifying facts. This is how chaos enters your life. Not because the world grew louder, but because your inner world lost its ability to filter the noise. The Stoics understood this well. They spoke not of control as domination, but as inner command. As Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." But true bravery is not always charging forward. Sometimes it is the strength to hold back. It requires more discipline to pause than to speak, more clarity to observe than to intervene. This is the foundation of real power, not performance, but precision. When you operate from this place of clarity, the need to control others vanishes. You focus only on the one thing that truly matters, yourself. Your environment ceases to be a battlefield and becomes a space for strategic movement. You begin to respond instead of react. You move with timing, not impulse. And in that quiet control, you find your freedom. There comes a point when you stop seeing individuals and begin to see the patterns that move them. This shift in perception alters the very fabric of your reality. Suddenly, you are no longer swept away by every conflict, no longer a participant in every drama you are invited to, no longer pulled under by every emotional tide. You come to understand that peace is not found in avoiding problems, but by finding stillness within them. Distance grants you that stillness. It is the sacred space between an emotion and your reaction to it, and it is in this space that your true power grows. Once you have learned to pause, to breathe, to remove yourself from the immediate pressure of the moment, you can see not only what is happening, but why it is happening. More importantly, you see how to move through it without losing yourself. This clarity is not always a comfortable gift. It will ask you to acknowledge truths you would rather avoid. It will illuminate the patterns in people you care about, in the decisions you've made, and in the cycles you have repeated. But without this clarity, you are merely surviving. And survival without insight is a loop, a relentless cycle of reaction, regret, and reset. Distance is what breaks that cycle. It slows you down just enough to see the choice before the mistake. This is a level of control most people never attain, because they are still trying to control the world instead of their perception of it. If your inner voice is constantly drowned out by the expectations, judgments, and demands of others, you are not living your own life. You are performing someone else's version of it. And performance is exhausting. It is unsustainable. Clarity allows you to choose where your energy flows. You no longer feel the need to attend every argument to which you are invited. You learn that most noise is not an emergency. It is merely a distraction. And when you live in distraction long enough, confusion becomes your default state. You begin to doubt what you know, to second-guess your intuition, to ask questions you have already answered simply because someone else disliked your truth. Distance is how you reclaim that power, not by withdrawing from the world, but by withdrawing your urgency to be understood by it. You are not here to be available to everyone's emotions. You are not here to carry the weight of every room you enter. You are here to move with clarity, to discern what is yours to carry and what is not. As you step into this way of being, conflict transforms. You stop seeing it as something to be fixed and begin to see it as information. Not everything requires a resolution. Some things just need space. This kind of discernment protects your energy. It aligns you with your purpose, steering you away from detours that lead nowhere. This is the difference between mere movement and true momentum. Anyone can be busy, but those who move with intention do so from a place of inner stillness, a place that can only be accessed when you step away from the pull of emotional chaos. This is where leadership truly begins, not as a performance on a public stage, but long before, in the silence, when no one is watching. Real leadership is forged in the private moments of doubt and frustration, in the decisions made without consensus or validation. The first person you must lead is yourself, not with words, but with unwavering action. Strength in leadership is rarely loud. It doesn't need to announce itself. Often, it just stands still, not because it feels no pressure, but because it has learned not to be ruled by it. The people who lead with quiet strength have already fought their greatest battles in private. They have wrestled with failure in empty rooms and built something unshakable within themselves. Carl Jung once said, "The world will ask you who you are, and if you don't know, it will tell you." This is the essence of leadership: to know yourself before the world attempts to define you. To build a foundation so strong that you need not raise your voice to be heard. This embodiment of self is born from 1,000 quiet choices. The choice to rise when it is easier to stay down, to act with integrity when compromise is convenient, to remain steady when everything inside feels unstable. In these private moments, a mask becomes necessary, not a mask of deception, but a structure of resilience. It is not something to hide behind, but something that holds you together, a tool to keep your doubt from leaking into your decisions. It is how you hold your ground long enough for clarity to return. With time, this mask becomes less about hiding and more about honoring your responsibility. People look to you in a crisis. They borrow your calm. What they need is not perfection, but steadiness, a sense that even if everything else is crumbling, you will not. This is why the strongest leaders are often misunderstood. Their silence is mistaken for aloofness, their restraint for indifference. But those who have worn the mask understand that real power is about regulation, not reaction. They move with a rhythm practiced long before anyone was watching. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that praise and criticism are both meaningless noise. What matters is living in accordance with your values. That principle is the anchor of real leadership. To cultivate this strength, you must learn to walk toward solitude. Solitude is not an escape from the world, but a return to yourself. The discomfort it brings is not from being alone, but from finally facing what lies within. It is a rare form of courage to be fully present with yourself, for in solitude there is no one to perform for. What remains is the raw material of your being, and the responsibility to refine it. People often confuse being alone with being lonely. Loneliness is an ache for something outside of you. Solitude is the quiet comfort of knowing you have everything you need within. When you feel at home in your own mind, external validation loses its grip. You no longer chase attention because you are already seen by the one person who matters most: you. In the stillness, you begin to rewrite the stories you've told yourself. You step away from who the world told you to be and return to who you were before it all became so noisy. The ability to be alone and feel whole is a superpower. It cultivates a calmness that cannot be faked, for it was built in the dark and sharpened in silence. That silence, in turn, becomes your greatest strategy. People fear what they cannot read, and nothing is more unreadable than someone who does not react, who does not rush to explain or correct. When you are silent, others begin to guess, and in their guessing, they reveal themselves. Power does not need to be understood. It needs to be unshaken. The moment you seek validation from others, you surrender control. Silence breaks that cycle. It is not an absence of thought, but the presence of deeper thought. It is the space where you remember who you are, without the world telling you who you should be. In that space, mastery becomes simple, not because you dominate the world around you, but because you have mastered the only thing you ever needed to, yourself. And from that mastery, clarity flows. quietly, relentlessly, unshakably, not through force, but through presence, not with noise, but with peace. This places the burden of interpretation on them, while you remain centered in your own calm. And that calm, that becomes your fortress. For the louder the world becomes, the more rare and valuable your silence is. We live in an age where every voice is given a microphone, every opinion a platform, yet few possess the strength to say nothing when it matters most, to let actions speak, to allow presence alone to carry weight. It is easy to shout. It is easy to react. It is easy to flood the space with noise. But the one who remains quiet while others are loud, who observes while others scramble to be seen, that is the one who draws the eye, not because they are hidden, but because they are unreadable. As Carl Jung once said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And that is what silence often demands, an acceptance that declares, I do not need your version of me to be whole. You begin to understand that silence is not the void, it is the container, the space where you decide what enters and what does not, what matters and what is dismissed, who you engage and who you leave unanswered. This is not arrogance, it is focus. Silence also grants you time to think clearly, to separate emotion from principle, to decide if speaking would truly serve you or merely satisfy your ego. And in that space, you gain leverage. You see the long game while others are trapped in short-term reactions. You play chess while they play checkers. This is not manipulation. It is maturity, the maturity to understand that not every fire needs to be fought. Some burn out on their own, and the ones that don't, you handle with clarity, not with panic. It is in silence that your reputation is shaped, not by what you say, but by how others speak of you when you refuse to defend yourself. And that reflection, the mirror held up by the room, tells you more about them than it does about you. Because if someone's opinion of you changes simply because you did not speak, they were never holding your truth. They were holding their own need for control. And when you deny them that, they feel discomfort. But their discomfort is not your responsibility. When you lead with silence, people begin to respect the way you move, not because you intimidate them, but because you create space for mystery. And mystery, when anchored in integrity, becomes presence. People lean in. They pay closer attention. Eventually, they learn to listen more and speak less, simply by being around you. That is leadership. Quiet, composed, intentional. This does not mean you never speak. It means you choose when, and more importantly, why. Speaking from a place of clarity is profoundly different than speaking from a place of pressure. One is rooted in truth, the other is driven by fear. And you can feel the difference. So can everyone else. There is a weight to words that are used sparingly. They land differently. They echo, because silence prepared the space for them to be heard. Marcus Aurelius believed we should waste no time arguing what a good man should be. We should simply be one. And that is the deeper principle behind strategic silence. It is not about withholding truth. It is about embodying it so fully that it no longer requires an explanation. You become the proof. Your life becomes the answer. Your peace becomes the message. As this mindset takes root, you begin to navigate the world differently. You stop jumping to defend every misunderstanding. You stop needing to correct every critic. You stop reacting to the things that once drained you, and in that restraint, you find your energy returning. You find time stretching. You find your thoughts gaining a profound clarity, because silence is not empty. It is where everything of importance begins to form. Even your relationships change. People approach you with more intention. They choose their words more carefully, not out of fear, but out of respect, because they have seen that you do not fill space just to be heard. You wait, you watch, you respond with meaning, and when you do speak, it is worth listening to. This is the kind of presence that needs no volume. It needs no grand gestures. It simply is, and people feel it long before they understand it. That is why silence is so powerful. It transcends explanation. It moves through rooms not with noise, but with energy. And the ones who master that energy, they do not just lead. They shape perception. They guide emotion. They hold space in a way few ever learn to. But make no mistake, this is not about detachment from the world. It is about a deep connection to yourself, to your values, to your inner compass, so that when the noise rises, you do not rise with it. You remain still, grounded, focused. And from that stillness, every move you make becomes intentional, every word meaningful, and every silence deliberate. So know this: silence is not emptiness. It is the most strategic form of presence. It is the pause that gives your mind room to think. It is the boundary that protects your energy. It is the posture that teaches others how to approach you, and the longer you live this way, the more you will see that power is not in how loudly you speak, but in how deeply your silence is felt. Most people want to be liked. It is natural. It feels good to be accepted, to be praised, to be seen as agreeable. We are conditioned from a young age to seek approval, from parents, teachers, and peers. In many ways, that approval becomes our compass. If they clap, we are on the right track. If they frown, we retreat. But leadership does not work that way. Leadership truly begins where popularity ends. Because to lead, at its core, is to decide. And real decisions, the ones that carry weight, are rarely met with universal applause. They come with risk, with backlash, with silence. It is easy to be liked when you are saying what people want to hear, when you reflect their expectations back at them, when you are smiling and nodding in agreement. This is performance, not leadership. But step outside that comfort. Say what is needed instead of what is wanted. Draw a boundary. Uphold a standard. Make a hard call that benefits the mission but upsets the moment. That is when the true test begins. Not when people love you, but when they do not, and you keep going anyway. Because leadership is not about keeping the peace. It is about holding the vision. The unpopular truth is this: many of the most important decisions you will ever make will make people uncomfortable. Some will misunderstand you. Others will resent you. And in those moments, you will feel the urge to backpedal, to soften your voice, to blend back in. But if you do, you lose yourself, and the role becomes hollow. Influence without integrity is just manipulation, and while manipulators may be liked, they are never trusted. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and who you truly are may not fit the mold others have built for you, especially not when you are leading. The moment you step into responsibility, you are no longer living for agreement. You are living for alignment, with your values, with your clarity, with an internal compass that will not always match the mood of the room. And that misalignment, that tension between what is right and what is popular, is where true leadership is forged. It is in that space that pressure builds, not just from others, but from within. You will ask yourself, am I being too harsh, too strict, too distant? And sometimes the answer will be yes. But more often, the discomfort is not a sign you are doing it wrong. It is a sign you are doing it alone. And that is the cost. That is the tax on leading with integrity instead of charm. You carry the weight not of approval but of clarity. And clarity often walks a lonely road. What people will not tell you is that the crowd rarely knows what it wants until after you have succeeded. They will question you along the way, doubt your methods, and push back on your vision. And yet, when the result comes, when the dust settles, they will rewrite the story. They will call it obvious, predictable, inevitable. But you will know the truth. You will remember the nights you stood in rooms full of silence, knowing you were right and wondering if it would ever matter. You will remember the moments you felt completely unseen, yet refused to bend. That is not pride. That is responsibility. Seneca wrote, "It is the power of the mind to be unconquerable." That is the inner steel leadership requires. The strength to remain upright when others try to fold you. The discipline to choose silence when you are baited into a reaction. The resilience to stay grounded when criticism comes dressed as concern. Because not everyone who questions you is trying to help. Some just want to see you shrink. And you will be tempted to shrink, to make your choices softer, more palatable. But each time you do, you chip away at the very clarity that got you there. You dilute your vision merely to ease the discomfort of those unwilling to carry their share of the burden. Leadership was never meant to be carried by consensus. It is carried by clarity, and that clarity must be protected, even if it means walking alone. This is why popularity becomes a trap. The more you chase it, the more you lose yourself. The more you need it, the more you can be controlled. A leader who depends on applause is merely a puppet, their strings pulled by the shifting moods of the crowd. But a leader grounded in principle cannot be moved by noise. They may feel it, but they do not fold. They listen, they adjust, but they do not surrender their core. Eventually, this becomes your identity. Not because you chose isolation, but because you chose integrity. And integrity, by its very nature, is a solitary path. Not always, not forever, but often enough that you must grow accustomed to the quiet, to the silence that follows a hard decision, to the tension that arises when you say no to what everyone else says yes to. But in that silence, something powerful happens. You stop needing their approval. And once you no longer need it, your decisions become sharper, your vision becomes cleaner, and your presence becomes undeniable. You will still feel the sting when people turn away. That is part of being human. You will still question yourself. That is part of being wise. But what you will not do is fold. Because you will have built something no opinion can break, a life aligned with truth, not trend, a voice anchored in principle, not performance. And when people finally see the results of what you stood for, when they come around and claim they believed in you all along, you will feel no need to correct them. Because a true leader does not lead for applause. A leader leads so that others can grow, even if it means growing without thanks, even if it means being the villain in their story for a time, until they are ready to write a new one. So, no, popularity is not the measure. It never was. Anyone can be liked. It is easy to be agreeable. But leadership means drawing lines in sand that will be washed over and redrawn. It means making choices that will not make sense until the result appears. It means speaking truth in rooms that only reward silence. And most of all, it means being at peace with being misunderstood, knowing that your clarity is not up for negotiation. In the end, people will not follow you because you made them feel good. They will follow because you made them feel safe, because your strength gave them permission to find their own. Because you did not chase their approval, you led with conviction, quietly, unshaken. And that presence, that unspoken authority, speaks louder than any crowd ever could. There is a strength that does not shout. It neither forces its way into a room nor vies for dominance in conversation. It simply exists, quiet, unbothered, unmoved. This kind of strength comes not from power or status, but from peace. Not the surface-level peace found in a vacation or a compliment, but a deeper kind. The kind that depends on nothing outside of you. The kind that remains even when everything else is falling apart. For the true measure of a person is not found in their composure during times of calm. It is in how they hold themselves when the tide turns against them, when the noise gets loud, when the chaos closes in, and when expectations stack up. That is when you discover whether you are grounded or merely pretending to be. The world will always find new ways to pull you from your center. Criticism, rejection, sudden change, pressure. And if you lack an anchor within, you will drift. You will react to everything. You will be offended by everything. You will try to manage the opinions, emotions, and projections of others. And in doing so, you lose control, not over them, but over yourself. The more reactive you become, the less influence you truly hold, because now you are being shaped by the very things you are trying to lead. That is the illusion of control, the belief that you can change the external world by managing it directly. But true control flows outward, not inward. One does not control a storm by shouting at the clouds. You master it by building a foundation within that no tempest can move. This is where inner peace becomes more than a feeling. It becomes armor, not the kind that hardens you, but the kind that protects you without changing who you are. It takes discipline to live this way, to pause when every fiber of your being wants to react, to breathe instead of lashing out, to stay rooted in what you know instead of what you feel in the moment. It is easy to be swept away by emotion, especially when you feel disrespected, overlooked, or misunderstood. But that is the trap. Because if anyone can pull you off course simply by pushing the right button, then your peace was never truly yours. It was conditional. It was borrowed. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." That discomfort you feel when someone criticizes you unfairly or challenges you without cause, it is not just about them. It is a reflection of what inside you is still unsettled, still raw, still unguarded. The more you use those moments to reflect instead of react, the more power you reclaim. Not over them, but over yourself. And that kind of power does not just protect you, it shapes the way people experience you. You become harder to provoke, not because you have shut down emotionally, but because you have mastered the art of keeping your balance. You begin to respond with precision, not panic. You do not rush to fill silence. You do not fight to win every conversation. You simply remain present, aware, and calm. And that calmness, it is magnetic. It disarms people. It makes them rethink their approach because they cannot figure you out. And what people cannot figure out, they begin to respect. The goal is not to intimidate. It is to lead. And real leadership comes not from controlling others, but from setting the tone. From modeling what it looks like to stay steady when things get messy. From showing people that chaos does not have to define them. That peace is not weakness. It is authority. It is the kind of authority that makes people feel safe in your presence, even if they do not understand why. Because you are not reacting like everyone else. You are not triggered like everyone else. You are still calm, grounded, in command. And here is what most people miss. Inner peace is not a passive state. It is an active practice. It is something you cultivate daily through the way you speak to yourself, manage your time, and respond to your emotions when no one is watching. It is forged in the small, invisible decisions that shape your entire mindset. Choosing not to argue when it will change nothing. choosing to walk away from what drains you, choosing to slow down when the pressure commands you to speed up. These choices compound. They become your foundation, your anchor. As Seneca said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." And he was right. Most of the chaos we experience is not in the world, but in our minds. It is the stories we tell ourselves about what might happen, what they might think, what it all might mean. If you do not learn to separate reality from your reaction to it, you will drown in your own thoughts. But when you are grounded, when your inner world is quiet, you begin to see the difference. You stop creating problems that do not exist. You stop letting imagined scenarios steal your peace. This shift affects more than just your emotional state. It sharpens your judgment. It makes your decisions cleaner and your actions more effective. Because now, you are not chasing control. You are living from it. You are not wasting energy managing how you are perceived. You are using that energy to move with purpose. And that kind of movement does not need to be fast. It just needs to be intentional. That is what separates reactive leadership from powerful presence. The ability to move slowly, calmly, even when everything around you is speeding up. Eventually, people notice. They may not always say it, but they feel it. They feel the difference when you walk into a room, when you speak, when you stay quiet, when you say no without apology, when you lead without drama. It shifts the entire dynamic, because now your presence speaks before you do. And in a world addicted to noise, presence is louder than volume. It carries further. It lasts longer. So when the chaos comes, and it always will, do not meet it with panic. Do not let it dictate your mood, your tone, or your choices. Return to yourself. Return to what you know. Return to the core values and principles you live by, to the calm you have worked so hard to build. And if you lose that peace for a moment, do not condemn yourself. Simply come back. Reclaim it. Protect it. Because that peace is your edge. It is what makes you rare, what makes you powerful, what makes you untouchable. Not because the world stops spinning, but because you have learned to stand still. Not because nothing moves you, but because you have mastered how to move through it. And that mastery, that quiet, steady, internal mastery, is what real leadership is built upon. Not control over others, but calm within yourself. Always. For most, the word lonely conjures images of sadness, of emptiness and isolation, a cold absence of connection. But there is another side to it, a quieter, less understood side. Because loneliness, in its purest form, is not always painful. Sometimes it is peaceful. Sometimes it is powerful. It becomes that rare kind of solitude that asks nothing of you. It does not demand that you entertain, explain, or impress. It simply lets you be. And in a world that is constantly trying to mold you, that space, where performance is not required and no one is watching, ceases to be a punishment. It becomes freedom. There comes a moment when you stop fearing solitude and start needing it. Not because you have grown to hate people, not because you are bitter or withdrawn, but because the noise becomes too loud, the expectations too heavy. And you begin to realize that the more you surround yourself with the expectations of others, the further you are pulled from the quiet truth of who you really are. The opinions, assumptions, and projections of others begin to shape your choices, your voice, your very identity, until one day you look in the mirror and barely recognize the person staring back. It is then that the silence calls to you, not as an escape, but as a return. The truth is, the most powerful people in this world, those who move with quiet certainty and lead with unshakable calm, are often the most solitary. They understand a fundamental truth that most do not. You cannot find yourself in a crowd. You cannot build clarity in the middle of chaos. You need distance, stillness, a space untouched by outside influence. This is the sacred ground where your real thoughts surface, where your true values rise. It is where you finally begin to ask, who am I when no one is watching? Who am I when I stop performing? And the answers, though quiet, will change everything. Solitude gives you back your sovereignty. It grants you the freedom to act without looking over your shoulder, to speak without softening your words for easier digestion, to create without worrying if it will be liked. You begin to live on your own terms, not because you don't care about others, but because you finally care enough about yourself to stop diluting your own essence. In solitude, you are no longer reacting. You are choosing. And the choices made free from pressure and performance become the very foundation of your freedom. Carl Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people about one, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself." This strikes deeper than most realize. The worst kind of loneliness isn't found in being alone. It's found in a crowded room where you still feel unseen. It's when your soul speaks a language no one around you understands. It's when your silence says more than your words ever could, but no one is listening. That is the loneliness that wounds, the kind that makes you question your place in the world. But the other kind of solitude, the kind you choose, is not a wound. It is a weapon. It is the means by which you protect your vision, shield your energy, and build something that needs no outside validation to survive. You owe no one an explanation for why you take time for yourself, why you skip the party, or why you walk away from shallow noise to sit with deep thoughts. You simply do it. And that unapologetic decision to stand alone, even for a little while, becomes a filter. It reveals who can meet you in that silence, and who only wanted your presence when it was convenient or entertaining. There is a clarity that comes only when you are alone, not the kind that strikes like lightning, but the kind that grows slowly, like fog lifting from a valley. As it clears, you see things you couldn't see before. You see the people who only reached out when they needed something, the ones who smiled but never truly listened. You see the habits that drained you and the places you went only to escape yourself. And so you begin to make subtle shifts. You speak less and listen more. You start saying no without the slightest hint of guilt. You stop chasing closeness with people who made you feel distant even when they were standing right next to you. And then, something remarkable happens. You stop being afraid of being misunderstood. You stop needing to be liked by everyone. You stop pleading for someone to hear what you've been trying to say. Because now, you have finally heard yourself. And in that sacred space, you have built a relationship with the only person who will be with you for your entire life. Yourself. That is not loneliness. That is alignment. That is the foundation of true power. Because when you are no longer dependent on others to define your worth, you become untouchable. You stop shrinking to fit in. You stop bending to please. You stand firm, not hard or bitter, but clear. This doesn't mean you reject connection. It means you raise the standard for it. You no longer settle for being half understood. You no longer give your time to people who drain your silence just to fill their own. You learn to enjoy company, but you no longer need it. You welcome conversation, but you don't chase it. You share your truth, but you refuse to water it down to be more digestible. You begin to walk a little lighter, not because life got easier, but because you're no longer carrying the weight of trying to be everywhere and everything for everyone. Of course, there will be moments when solitude feels sharp, when the silence is louder than the noise, when you miss the warmth of another voice or the ease of shared laughter. That is part of the process. Even the strongest among us feel that ache. But strength isn't about never feeling lonely. It's about not letting that loneliness drive you back to the very places that made you forget who you were. It's about learning to sit with that ache and trust that it is not a sign of failure, but a reminder of how deeply you feel, how much you value connection, and how sacred your energy truly is. Eventually, that space you once feared becomes your sanctuary, a place where you write, reflect, and heal, a place where no one can interrupt your thoughts, where your vision can stretch without limits. You begin to crave that stillness, not because the world has nothing to offer, but because you've realized that everything you were chasing out there was always rooted in something you hadn't yet found in here. And now that you have, you protect it as if your life depends on it. Because in many ways it does. So let them call you distant. Let them wonder why you disappeared. Let them misunderstand your silence. What they don't see is what you are building. What they can't hear is what it is teaching you. And what they will never touch is the kind of strength that grows when no one else is around. Not because you are hiding, but because you are becoming. Not because you are broken, but because you are finally whole, listening to the one voice that was drowned out by the noise for far too long. That isn't loneliness. That is liberation. That is the purest form of freedom. The freedom to be fully yourself, without compromise and without explanation. And once you have tasted it, you will never go back. You will never again trade your peace for company. You will never again fill your life with people just to feel less alone. Because now you know, being alone is not the same as being empty. Sometimes it is the only way to be full. Most people chase attention as if it were oxygen, filling every silence, answering every message, showing up in every room just to be seen. But real influence doesn't operate that way. It isn't about being the loudest voice or the most visible face. It is about presence that has weight, words that echo, and appearances that matter. The more available you are, the less people notice you, because anything that is always there simply fades into the background. It becomes familiar, expected, and eventually taken for granted. That is why the most powerful people are not always visible, but when they do show up, you feel it. There is something deeply human about craving what we cannot easily have. It is wired into our psychology. Scarcity makes us look twice. It makes us lean in. It makes us wonder. So when someone holds their presence carefully, not out of arrogance, but out of intention, it forces others to assign meaning to it. Their silence feels mysterious. Their time feels expensive, and their attention feels earned. This isn't about manipulation. It's about understanding value. Because just like gold, the rarer your presence becomes, the more people start to treasure it. You cease to be a constant, and you become an event. It is easy to believe that in order to matter, you must be everywhere, in every social post, every conversation, every meeting. But that strategy only spreads you thin. It makes your presence diluted and predictable. And true influence requires density, not volume. It is not about how often people see you. It's about how deeply they feel you when you are there. When you are constantly available, constantly explaining, constantly proving yourself, you rob yourself of that impact. The silence that could have spoken for you gets drowned in noise you never needed to make. Carl Jung observed, "The more compulsive a person is in impressing others, the less he is impressed with himself." This is the trap many fall into, always showing up, always needing to be visible, always broadcasting. But the ones who command a room without saying a word have learned to let absence speak for them. They've learned that influence isn't about chasing admiration. It's about creating a space for others to recognize your value without you having to sell it. They don't need to compete for attention because they have cultivated an energy that attention naturally follows. There is a discipline in withdrawal, in holding back, in not reacting to every provocation or chasing every opportunity for visibility. Because what you withhold becomes powerful. People wonder what you are thinking. They anticipate your input. They respect your timing. You stop being predictable, and that unpredictability makes you magnetic. You become the person who doesn't always speak, but when you do, people listen, because you have trained them to expect substance, not noise, intention, not filler. And that difference sets you apart in a world that over-explains and underthinks. You also begin to see how much energy you were spending trying to be seen by people who were never really looking. How many times you showed up out of a fear of being forgotten. How often you gave your presence away as if it had no cost. But when you reclaim that power, when you start showing up on your terms, not out of insecurity, you realize something profound. People start chasing the version of you that no longer chases them. You are not just noticed, you are remembered. Not because you shouted, but because your silence said something they couldn't ignore. Withdrawing your attention also creates room for reflection. When you are not constantly performing, you can observe, you can listen, you can learn. You begin to move with precision instead of impulse. Your decisions become more deliberate, your actions more meaningful, and your words, when you finally choose to use them, cut deeper, land harder, and linger longer. That is the kind of presence that sticks, the kind people talk about even when you're not around. Because you have become more than just a person in the room. You have become a standard, a benchmark, a reference point for presence with purpose. This does not mean you isolate yourself. It means you refine your timing. You learn that being everywhere is not the same as being effective. That attention is not the prize. It is the byproduct of mastery. You don't need to insert yourself into every discussion or be the center of every plan. You just need to move with such clarity and self-respect that when you do choose to engage, it carries weight. And when you don't, it still carries meaning, because even your absence has become a part of your influence. The shift is internal first. You stop measuring your worth by how many people see you. You stop craving applause. You start building silence into your strength and distance into your strategy. And when you finally release that need to be constantly validated, you become something rare, something people cannot quite define. That mystery, that quiet confidence, is what makes them lean in. Because we do not chase what is always in front of us. We chase what holds itself just out of reach, what requires effort to understand, what demands our attention without ever asking for it. You realize that presence is not a performance. It is an offering, one that becomes more powerful when it's not handed out freely, but reserved for the moments that truly matter. And the people who truly see you, who truly value you, will not need you to be everywhere to feel your influence. They will feel it in the silence, in the choices you make, in the spaces you no longer fill with noise. Influence, after all, is not about being loud. It is about being unmistakable. And when your energy carries that kind of weight, you don't have to force people to notice. They just do. Eventually, people stop questioning your quiet. They stop mistaking your absence for weakness. They start seeing it for what it is, a deliberate withdrawal, a conscious move, a decision rooted in clarity, not avoidance. Because power isn't proven by how often you speak. It is proven by how much your silence says, by how people respond when you enter a room and what they feel when you leave it. And the ones who understand this, who practice it, become impossible to ignore. Not because they chase the spotlight, but because they have outgrown the need for it. So while the world continues to scramble for attention, posting, performing, shouting, you can remain still, intentional, unbothered. You can build a presence that doesn't shout for recognition, but commands it through restraint. You don't force your value onto anyone. You allow them to come to it on their own. And when they do, It is not because you begged to be seen. It is because your absence was loud enough to remind them what your presence felt like. And that is the kind of influence that lasts. In an age when everyone is fighting to be noticed, the ones who choose to be rare become unforgettable. Because what is scarce is not just desired, it is remembered, not for how often it showed up, but for how it made people feel when it did. Power is often misunderstood. People say it corrupts, that the moment someone rises, they become cold, ruthless, or self-absorbed. But the truth is usually more uncomfortable than that. Power doesn't create something new inside of you. It simply turns up the volume on what is already there. It strips away the mask of politeness, the illusion of humility, the performance of virtue. It removes the need to pretend. And suddenly, the parts of you that were once buried beneath fear or self-doubt begin to surface. Power doesn't corrupt. It reveals. This is why those who chase power without ever looking inward tend to fall apart the moment they get it. Because what they have been hiding from in the quiet, the unresolved insecurities, the lack of self-discipline, the hunger for validation, doesn't disappear with success. It grows teeth, it spreads, and it begins to spill into every decision they make. The ones who become dangerous are not those who hold power. They are those who never learned how to hold themselves. Because power in the hands of the ungoverned becomes a mirror turned outward, reflecting their chaos onto the world. But those who have done the inner work know better. They understand that the climb isn't about status or applause. It is a test. The higher you go, the more eyes are on you, the more your choices echo, the more your silence speaks. That is why the truly powerful disappear into themselves before they rise, not to isolate, but to understand, to clean the lens through which they see the world, to strengthen the hands that will eventually carry more weight. Because if the foundation is not strong, no height is safe. Self-awareness is not a luxury at the top. It is a necessity. Without it, power becomes noise, influence becomes manipulation, and leadership becomes theater. But when you have faced your own shadows, when you have sat in your silence and asked yourself the hard questions, power doesn't intoxicate you. It humbles you. Because you start to see how fragile it all really is. How easy it is to lose yourself in praise. How tempting it is to believe you are above correction. And how vital it is to keep returning to yourself for clarity. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That is the hidden trap of power. Without introspection, you start believing your impulses are wisdom. You confuse fear with instinct. You justify pride as principle. And before long, the very thing you once sought to master ends up mastering you. But when you bring your unconscious patterns into the light, when you catch yourself before your ego takes the wheel, you begin to steer with purpose instead of impulse. Discipline becomes the quiet thread running through everything you do, not the kind that shows off, but the kind that says no when no one is watching, the kind that builds when applause is absent, the kind that stays rooted when opportunities to exploit, impress, or dominate present themselves like easy victories. It is this inner restraint that separates real strength from loud ambition. Because power handed to someone without that restraint is like placing fire in the hands of a child. It burns far more than it builds. And so the powerful retreat, not as a sign of weakness, but as a preparation for presence. They create space to think clearly, to reconnect with their principles, to remember why they started. They do not need to be seen to feel significant. They do not need to control others to feel in control, because they have learned that the hardest person to lead is the one in the mirror. And once they have done that, leading others becomes a responsibility, not a performance, a sacred weight, not a spotlight. The true cost of power is that you can no longer hide. The world looks to you not for perfection, but for clarity. And if your soul is cluttered, your leadership will be too. That is why arrogance isn't a byproduct of power. It is the echo of an unexamined self. And humility, contrary to what many believe, doesn't mean shrinking. It means understanding the gravity of your role and still choosing to move with care, to listen more than you speak, to think longer before you act, and to know that every choice casts a shadow, sometimes longer than you will ever see. This is why the strongest leaders do not rush. They do not react. They respond. They carry their silence like a blade. They move through conflict with a deep calm, not because they feel nothing, but because they have trained themselves to feel everything without being ruled by it. They have spent years learning how to stand still in storms without collapsing. And it is that stillness, not their charm, not their charisma, that earns them respect. The tragedy is that many will only seek inner growth after they have been broken by their own power, after the position, the status, or the influence has amplified their weaknesses so loudly they can no longer be ignored. And sometimes, by then, the damage is already done. Reputations crumble, relationships fracture, trust dissolves. Because power without self-mastery always leaves a trail behind it. A trail of people who saw the mask slip, who heard the words that should never have been said, who felt the consequences of a person who never truly knew themselves. But it does not have to be that way. You do not have to wait until power exposes you to begin that inner work. You can start now, in the silence, in the ordinary, in the daily practice of checking your intentions, of asking yourself what you are really after and why, of sitting with the discomfort that comes from realizing you are not as in control as you thought, but being brave enough to learn anyway. Because the ones who become unshakable are rarely the ones who began with power. They are the ones who began with self-respect. You learn to lead yourself before leading others, to hold your own emotions before holding authority, to guide your thoughts before guiding anyone's path. And when that kind of order exists within you, it is visible without you ever trying. People can sense it in your voice, in your stillness, in the weight of your presence. Not because you have built a persona, but because you have dismantled everything that wasn't real and rebuilt from the ground up, with intention. So if you ever find yourself rising, whether in business, in influence, or simply in the eyes of others, remember this: what is behind your eyes will always be seen. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly, subtly, over time. Your private habits will eventually seep into your public leadership. Your hidden fears will echo in your decisions, and your insecurities will quietly shape the way you treat those in your charge. This is the true weight of power, not the seizing of it, but the carrying of it cleanly. And if you have done the work, if you have stared into your own darkness and refused to flinch, if you have trained your mind to remain calm when chaos comes knocking, then power will not corrupt you. It will clarify you. It will illuminate the very architecture you have spent years building inside yourself. And that kind of power, not the loud, commanding kind, but the quiet, composed, anchored kind, is what creates change that lasts. Not because it forces people to follow, but because it gives them something real to follow. Something rooted, something earned, something unshakable. In the beginning, we are all chasing something loud. Recognition, applause, attention. The eyes of others become our compass, and the noise becomes a kind of fuel. It feels good to be seen. It feels like progress. But as you ascend, through discipline, through silence, through trial, that noise begins to fade. The crowds thin. The people who once cheered you on grow busy with their own lives, and suddenly you are left with the one thing most people never prepare for: the quiet. The summit is not crowded, not because few are capable of the climb, but because few are willing to continue without the constant reassurance of affirmation. For many, the silence feels like failure. But for the wise, it is where the real work begins. A strange and profound shift occurs when you no longer need to be celebrated, when you stop looking back to see who is watching and start looking inward to see who is guiding. The truly powerful understand this. They do not climb for the praise. They climb because they know that only in that quiet, rarefied air can you truly hear your own thoughts. Only there can you face yourself without distraction. And that is the part most people miss. The top is not a stage, it is a mirror. And if you have never learned to stand before it without flinching, you will sabotage yourself the moment you arrive. The summit strips away all illusions. It reveals whether your ambition was rooted in purpose or in performance, whether your drive came from inner clarity or outer validation. Those who climb for the image often crumble under the weight of that isolation. They begin to question everything. They look for ways to descend, not because they failed, but because the silence was louder than they ever expected. But those who climbed with intention, they sit in that silence not as a punishment, but as a peace. They understand that presence does not require an audience. It requires alignment. Carl Jung once wrote, "Solitude is for me a fount of healing, which makes my life worth living." That kind of solitude, the summit kind, is not merely about being alone. It is about being so deeply connected to yourself that you are no longer desperate for connection from others. It is about knowing who you are, without needing the world to agree. And in a culture that equates attention with value, that kind of self-possession is nothing short of revolutionary. But make no mistake, the silence will test you. It will ask you to reconsider your beliefs, your motives, your very identity. It will dredge up insecurities you thought were long buried. It will challenge your patience, your confidence, your direction, and it will do so quietly, without drama or chaos, but with a slow, steady mirror held up to your soul. This is why so many turn back, not because they lack talent, but because they are not ready to meet the person waiting for them at the top. The summit demands presence. It demands that you stop outsourcing your sense of worth, that you stop performing and start listening, that you stop collecting titles and start cultivating truth. And it is difficult, because no one is clapping for you anymore. No one is feeding your ego. No one is there to soften the blow when you realize you have built an identity around being liked instead of being whole. The top reveals all of it, gently, brutally, honestly. But if you stay, if you do not run from the silence, you begin to hear something deeper. You begin to access a clarity that cannot be taught. You begin to lead not with noise, but with presence. Your words slow down. Your decisions become intentional. You become more aware of your impact, not because others are watching, but because you are. That is the kind of leadership that endures, the kind that does not need to be loud to be powerful. Because at the summit, you do not shout, you whisper, and those whispers carry further than the loudest noise at the base. They carry weight because they come from stillness, because they are not reaction but reflection. That is what people remember, not the ones who spoke the most, but the ones who meant every word, not the ones who were always visible, but the ones whose presence lingered, even in their absence. And perhaps that is the ultimate paradox. You climb thinking you will be more seen, only to realize the goal was never visibility, it was vision. You wanted others to understand you, but what you found was an understanding of yourself. And suddenly, you no longer need the world to echo your thoughts. You just need to live them, embody them. Let them shape how you show up in every room, whether full or empty. This is the path the powerful walk, not because they are immune to doubt, but because they have made peace with it. They have stopped trying to outrun silence and have started listening to what it has to say. They have stopped measuring their worth by the response they get and started measuring it by the alignment they feel. And in doing so, they build something few ever do: unshakable self-trust. That is the real summit. Not the title, not the status, not the spotlight. It is the unwavering trust in yourself to walk with purpose when no one is beside you, to hold your vision when no one else can see it, to keep building when no one is watching. Because you are no longer climbing for them. You are climbing for something deeper, something that doesn't disappear when the applause fades, but in fact only begins when it stops. And when people see you, truly see you, they will notice something different. You are not performing, you are not pleasing, you are simply present, anchored, grounded in a sense of self that wasn't built overnight. It was earned in the quiet, in the hours when doubt crept in and you did not run, in the mornings when no one noticed and you still showed up, in the moments when it was just you and your thoughts and you chose to stay. That kind of presence does not need validation. It does not crave attention. It radiates something far more potent: certainty. Not the arrogant kind, but the quiet, settled kind. The kind that speaks even when you are silent. The kind that leads without demanding. The kind that transforms without needing credit. That is what the summit gives you, if you are willing to stay long enough to receive it. So if your path ever starts to feel lonely, do not panic. It is not a sign that you are lost. It may be the first real sign that you are on the right track. Because the higher you go, the fewer people there are. Not because the view isn't worth it, but because so few are willing to keep going when the crowd disappears. Few are willing to become whole in the silence. But if you are, if you let the quiet shape you, you will discover that true power doesn't come from being seen. It comes from being steady. You will discover that the summit isn't empty. It is full of meaning, of clarity, of truth. And your presence will be louder than any praise you left behind.